Hello, and welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, a weekly conversation with women who found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm your host, Dawn Davis, and this is episode number 23. Oh, my age. Just kidding. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. And if you're a returning listener, thank you so much for coming back. More information about the podcast and about our weekly guests can always be found at the website desertladydiaries.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and on Instagram. You can send us an email too. desertladydiaries@gmail.com is the address. And if you'd like to support the podcast in a financial way, you can find yellow donate buttons on the website pages in the upper right-hand corner. This week, my guest is Pat Flanagan. Pat wanted to get back to the desert and be actively involved in her community, and there is no doubt she is doing just that. So if you see her around town, make sure you say thank you. Welcome back to Desert Lady Diaries. Today, my guest is Pat Flanagan, who grew up roaming the San Gabriel Mountains, which set her course for life, which was to live with open spaces and long views, watching nature work. She moved to the Mojave for these values and because of family members in 29 Palms. She is a science educator, a storyteller, a community member, and an activist. Pat also serves on the Morongo Basin Municipal Advisory Council, representing the Desert Heights area. These positions are appointed by the district supervisor and not elected. She has been on the board of the Morongo Basin Conservation Association since 2004, from which position she's written comment letters on industrial-scale renewable energy, illegal OHV use, BLM road plans, and development projects. Through the Municipal Advisory Council and outside her home area, she's been involved in land use issues, solar development proposal at the Joshua Tree Airport, and the Altamira residential project in Joshua Tree, which is the first time I think I was actually introduced to Pat, and I'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. She would like to see more action throughout the basin on air quality and dirt road management. Thanks for taking time out of all your busyness to come and talk with us today.
You're very welcome.
So I always start with, what was your first encounter with the desert?
My first encounter with the desert was with my family when I was a little kid. And we went out to visit, my guess is, thinking back on it, we went out to visit somebody who had one of those 5-acre homesteads.
Wow.
And it was really pretty, and I liked it. Then after that, I went back to school when I was 35 to get my degree in biology. And then I worked in the Anza-Borrego Desert for a while. I was the first person in their visitor center when it opened. And then I opened a business, which was a rent-a-naturalist business. And I can remember an entrance coming down at some point in there in which I drove on State Route 22, and I'm coming down the hill, and I'm seeing the San Felipe Valley in front of me, and I'm going, oh God, that would be, what a place. That is gorgeous. Well, I've now had a trailer there on a friend's property since.
Wow.
So the Anza-Borrego is also my home place.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't been down there yet.
It's totally gorgeous and different than Joshua Tree.
Yeah, that's what I hear. So I'm excited to someday eventually make that trip down there.
Yeah.
So tell me about going back to school at 35. What spurred that decision?
Well, I couldn't read the biology, the reports, the scientific reports in the biological areas that I was interested in. I didn't know enough to figure it out because of the way they write those things. And I'd been working in laboratories for years. My degree focus, which I never got, was English literature. And so I finally thought, what am I doing? I'm just going to go back and get a degree in biology. And that was a brilliant move on my part because I went to Long Beach State, and at that time Long Beach State was really a field school. You went out in the field and you learned things on the ground. And now it's so much microbiology, but then all of those cells actually came packaged in organisms, and so you got to see how birds fly and what they are, and then how it was wonderful. So that really set me going back to my youth. That really put me where my youth had put me.
Right. Yeah.
And what I've been doing all along. And I don't know, I guess maybe I thought I was afraid of science when in fact I'm in love with science.
Right.
So I'm not afraid.
Which is interesting because I've gone to, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mount St. Mary's in Los Angeles.
Yes.
And I don't know how long they've been doing it, but every year they do this annual report on the status of women and girls in California. And every year they talk about the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and I don't remember what the M is either. That's horrible. But anyway, one of the things I remember from attending one of those conferences was there was a lot of conversation around women starting off in college in the sciences or engineering, and they would go through school, do very well, but then when it came to actually working in the field, many of them dropped out because they were not accepted as women in that field. Did you ever run up against any of that sort of thing?
No, and that's because when I graduated, that was just, this goes back a long ways, as the Endangered Species Act and all those things were fairly new. And what I would have done was go to work for a company that does environmental impact reports. But I was looking at the way they did reports then, and I'm going, I don't want to work for a company that when it does its bird reports, it does them in the wrong season. You know, there was games being played until that got all figured out. And so really, I've been a science educator, both as a naturalist and working with basically adults in the field and throughout the deserts of California, down into Baja California, up into the Great Basin, and really telling the stories of the organisms. And I'm a systems thinker, so of the way things work, the structure, the function, the interactions, the consequences, the feedback loops. Those are what make the stories and what you go, whoa, you know, what's happening here? And I've written curriculum using those models for 4th through 6th grade.
Oh, wow.
Both on the coast and in Imperial Valley.
Okay.
That's not what students are learning. They don't learn how to think in terms of feedbacks, structure and function.
When you decided to make the move to the desert, how did that whole thing go down?
Well, I had been working as I graduated. That was not too long. I guess it was from the previous July to when I graduated. That previous July, going with friends, I'd gone into Anza-Borrego Desert during the sheep count. And so that's in the middle of summer. So I was exploring around, and I thought, I want to go to work I could go to work for state parks. And so I did, but the supervisor didn't put me where I wanted to go. He put me as the first uniformed person in the visitor center as it opened in 1979. So I had that experience, which was really cool, working with lots of people and setting up systems and doing that. And I just really fell in love with Anza-Borrego. And at that time, for a while, I lived in my truck. Then I bought a tent trailer, and I lived in a sort of a remote area. And then I bought a much bigger trailer, not too new, but perfect, and moved that into the southern part of the park where it still is and where it's perfectly usable and where I go periodically.
That's awesome. And how about coming to Joshua Tree? How did that...
Then I left San Diego. It was time to go. It was time to get out of the city. Even though I was in, really good places there, I lived in Imperial Beach the whole time, which is right there on the ocean. I was 1 block from the ocean.
Wow.
And could look across to Mexico. But just, I was getting older, and I gotta get back to the desert. So I could have gone to Borrego Springs, or I could go to 29 Palms, because that's where I have family. I decided to come to 29 Palms because living in Imperial Beach, which was a very active community because there had been a situation where they wanted to dredge the entire estuary and make a marina out of it.
Oh boy.
That's not what happened. But getting to not what's happened to make it a National Estuarine Research Reserve was a big deal. And then I was the first education coordinator for that. And, well, you don't play in politics if you're an education coordinator. Then I was at the Natural History Museum, and you don't play in politics there either. And so I thought, I want to go to a place where I'm in a community and I can go to city council meetings. And so having family, small community, don't have to drive very far, here I am.
That's cool. And I ran into you at a recent historical meeting for lack of a better word, where the Duns were talking about growing up in 29 Palms. And it was kind of cool because I had just finished Helen Bagley's book.
Oh, okay.
So while they're showing the slides of, all these old timers, I'm making connections, after having read the book, which is super cool.
Yeah.
And I went with someone else and we were talking afterwards, and we said it seemed like a place where a lot of people who have lived there for a very long time can come once a month, and they kind of reminisce and look back on their history and the way things used to be, but they also are keeping that community feel by doing that.
That's not exactly how it works, because that lecture series, this is the first year they've concentrated, because that comes out of the Desert Institute.
Okay.
And they set up this year so that they would bring in the old timers. That was, done on purpose. Done, yeah.
Yeah. But
yeah. Yeah, that's why this whole series has been fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really interesting to see. And I think, at the end of the year when I kind of wrapped the podcast for the holiday, and I put out a call to people that were listening to say, if there's anything, any questions you want me to start asking, or any suggestions that you have. And a number of people reached out and said, we'd really like to hear from people that have been here for a long time and what it was like. And I even say, get that book, Sand in My Shoe, because there's even some photographs in there that show the road that Frank Bagley would have to take to Riverside to get their supplies to stock their grocery store. And just thinking about what it must have been like living here then without, and we don't have a lot of quote unquote modern conveniences, but we have enough to get by. Someone in LA or San Diego might disagree, but we like it that way. Mm-hmm. But to imagine it without any of what we have now.
Not only Helen Bagley's book, Sand in My Shoe, but just go to the museum. Everybody that's going to deal with you in that museum is a volunteer and has probably lived there for 40 years, and maybe their parents live there.
Right.
So you will meet the people.
Right, exactly.
Who were there.
Yeah.
And they're still here and active. Mm-hmm. And that museum, its collections is world class.
Yeah,
and their preservation of that is stuff. Also I understand the Getty came to visit and they were shocked. They were really impressed.
Oh wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting, that when they do something. So right now they're raising money to build an addition so that we don't have to turn people away during presentations.
Right.
Very worthwhile place to give your money.
Yeah.
Because you keep that history alive.
Mm-hmm. No, it was fascinating. We really enjoyed the presentation. I think it was Jeff that stood up and said, my kindergarten sweetheart is in the audience.
Yes, that's right.
And I actually talked to Liz after the program, and I'm going to reach out to her and have her come on and talk as well. So I'm excited about that and to hear what she has to offer. And I think the listeners will really like it too.
I know. And my relative there is Jane Smith, who grew up here in that family. Okay. And Jane went to high school at Mayfield, which is not too far from where you were talking about earlier, right. And that's where I met her.
Oh, okay.
And that's where when she was a freshman and my brother Paul was a freshman, I introduced them. Didn't take right away, but but later on.
Pat Flanagan, matchmaker.
Yes, exactly. That's me. Well, I was thinking, okay, somebody has to go to this dance. Let's get.
And you also, speaking of 29 Palms and the inn, you do nature walks out there.
I do.
Free of charge.
Free of charge.
Yeah.
Anybody can come, and I do them the weekends. Occasionally I'm not there, and because who wants to drive in? I live 15 minutes outside of town.
Right.
So you just have to call the inn the night before, Friday or Saturday, and say I would like to come, and they'll tell you if I'm not there, but then otherwise I'm there. What an honor and a great experience for somebody who wants to tell stories. The stories go on forever, from how come the oasis is there? When was it there? Who were the first inhabitants? How long ago? What's going on? How come? What happened to them? What happened to the Indians? And then the plants, the story of there is just a lot of stories. So it's a lot of fun. And I started in 2002, and I'm not doing the same talk that I did in 2002.
Certainly, yeah, exactly. Well, and I bet even people coming through and asking those questions may even spur you
absolutely.
To go and research something else and say, well, that's really interesting. I should incorporate that in this.
Yeah, you start talking about it, and then all of a sudden, I used to do this, but now I'm doing this. And I meet people from all over the world, which I would not do, and have substantial conversations with them. Who would have guessed? But yes.
Right. Yeah. No, I didn't know. So I may come out there one weekend and see you.
Do come.
Yeah, for sure.
Because what we talk about, you aren't going to find anywhere else.
No, I even when I was doing my research yesterday, I found 2 little Vimeo videos of you talking about teddy bear cholla and Ocotillo. I guess you went out with some videographer and recorded a couple things, and those even weren't interesting. There's so much to learn, and I think a lot of folks that are new to this area, they don't even realize that something they may be doing around their house may be like disturbing the desert landscape. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I'm a new person here. I mean, I'm living in a place that's obviously maintained professionally, so I don't have
There's not much to disturb,
issue.
Actually.
No, they did a good job.
They're done. But if you just go out there, out the door and look out, there you go. And that's typical of this area. In between where you live and somebody else and businesses, frequently you have big swaths of natural desert.
Right, exactly. And that's, exactly what I've got looking out my front window, which is one of the things that was so attractive when I saw this place and I looked out the window and I thought, oh, this is it. I want this one. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So let's get into that a little bit, kind of also talking about earlier we talked about getting involved in the community and somewhere where you go to a city council meeting. So let's talk a little bit about desert dust and OHV use and all that kind of stuff and why those things are important to keep top of mind for people that are here or people that are visiting. Because I think we do a lot of education and a lot of people that live here start to know what to do, but we get a lot of people coming in from out of town who come in and do stuff that's just destructive.
Well, the first thing you should do if you live here is wherever your rake is, cut it up and get rid of it. Don't rake. You need either the natural mulch or you need your plants there. But I think part of my learning curve was to learn about the ground. And that really began when they put in the Cascade Solar in the Joshua Tree Basin. And I started living with periodic dust clouds that were horrific and went on for hours. What's going on here? And what's really going on here is that beginning at that dry lake area and where they put Cascade Solar and where they wanted to put the solar on the airport, that's the beginning of a sand transport path. It's essentially a linear dune.
Okay.
And it's formed, if you look at Copper Mountain, you'll see sand, ramps going up the side, and you'll see them from both sides. When you're coming from the east going, you'll see them. That's where the sand has gone up and over and settled on the other side and then started going up again.
Oh, wow.
To tell you that it goes nearly 140 miles. And so it goes all the way down Highway 62. And next time you're driving on 62, look at it. It's sand.
Yeah.
It's loose. You get out, you're going to sink a little. Okay?
Yeah.
So it goes out to Highway 177, where because of the mountains, it makes a right-hand turn and goes south on 177, hits 10, and because of the mountains, it goes east to Blythe.
Oh, wow.
And those sand transport paths, they've studied sand down along the I-10 because of the fringe-toed lizard, and they've done this here, which requires sand and sand replacement. But they specifically tell you in the studies, which are quite good, they didn't study the dust. And sand is going to move, about 30 centimeters high, and it bumps around and it goes, and dust moves thousands of feet high.
Sure.
And it goes great distances, and it has all kinds of physical effects that can happen to you, from your lungs to your heart to whatever. For us, that's called the Clark's Pass sand transport, because when you've passed Wonder Valley, you go through a narrow area. That's Clark's Pass, so that's where the name comes from. We also get a good deal of dust from Lucerne Valley. The dust comes down out of the Johnson Valley area, or also out of Lucerne, because they have their solar plants. They're on the same kind of situation. I've seen the dust coming south and making a left-hand turn going into the Morongo Basin. So my analysis is, and I believe this to be correct, and nobody has gainsaid me, that when I look from where I live, if I can't see the marine base, that's dust from Lucerne Valley. When I can't see anything, that's dust coming in from the west.
Wow.
Now, the interesting thing is the Mojave Desert Air Quality Management District does not have any dust monitors. This dust is called PM10 for particulate matter 10. There are no monitors in the Mojave Desert east of Victorville.
And why is that?
Probably expense. And I also think that this whole solar and big disturbance, because it's really very different if you're going to disturb the edge of a road and it's going to be vegetated, or if you're going to have a housing district, or you're going to put in a shopping center. All those are going to be covered over. These aren't. They are not covered over. And best management practices to keep the dust in place really are not adequate. They don't work. For most of the year, the water works for an hour, and it's a great waste of water to water your ground if you're scraping it.
Right.
And other chemical additives and things might work for some months or a couple of years, but then they're not working, and there's nobody there to manage anyway, and they couldn't spread them on again because of all the polls and all that other stuff. So, but I think they don't have monitors out here to begin with because it's not urban. They figured who's out there and what's going on, and that the Bureau of Land Management will tell you for their plans that off-road vehicles on dirt roads, that's just kind of background dust. That is incorrect. You can just see and breathe it.
Oh, yeah.
Who does measure dust is the National Park. But their dust monitors are basically trained to look at their area. There's also 4 monitors on the Marine base. And they are in different places because they watch. And they have one that actually is monitoring to see if there any kind of a disturbance to 29 Palms. Oh, okay. So sometimes the Mojave Desert AQMD uses that to say what your air quality is. If you go to their website, it'll say PM10 and PM 2.5, which is particulate matter 2.5 is smaller, but it generally comes from engines and things, so I'm not very worried about that.
Yeah.
It's the PM10, and there's no way actually to deal with it, and there's a great number of plans that are in somebody's mind or in the works to scrape square miles of desert land. What holds that sand in place is the root systems of creosote, the commonest plant in the deserts of the Southwest, and galleta grass, a bunch grass. Neither of these are endangered. Nobody gets all excited about them. They ought to. And so you take them out, and there is nothing to hold it there. And that's the way it is, and it blows.
And what's in this particulate matter?
Dust. It's the fine particles, so it could be whatever minerals, but they get into your lungs. And by doing that, they not only, so people with asthma, it'll give you asthma. People with heart conditions, this is going to exacerbate that. So it's whatever is that fine small particle. Out here, I don't know that it's any more than the small part that's blown in from the feeder place is Emerson Dry Lake on the Marine base. That's where, there hasn't been any, as far as I know, toxic maneuvers.
No.
So it's the particles themselves.
Well, and the whole idea for, early on for people coming out here was that the air was dry and
so
great
good
for people's asthma. And
that's right.
Now we're just going to stir it up and it won't be.
When you look at what's happening in the Salton Sea, you look at what could happen along the I-10 because they're not paying attention and they don't listen. Because South Coast air quality is also to blame for this. For the initial part of the I-10 is their district. They don't have any monitors. They monitor in Palm Springs, which is different. And when they put out their permits and they're looking, they don't do a soils analysis. They don't say, tell me what your soils are and what are the hazards of blowing sand.
Wow.
And dust. So, I've sort of become the madman about that. If you look on the web and you Google sand transport path in the Mojave Desert, you will see a PowerPoint that I put together, which I delivered at the Lucerne Valley Municipal Advisory Council meeting to the executive director of the AQMD and his chief of operations. And they didn't say me nay. They instead invited me to sit on their technical advisory team. So I do. And that's not to keep me quiet. They're not
right.
Yeah. That isn't going to keep me. No, that puts me in a good position. And right now, stay tuned. Some interesting things may be happening from a meeting I went to just this week and met some people from South Coast Air Quality, but too early to talk quite yet. We may all have small monitors. There's individual monitors that are not the $60,000 ones, but They cost a couple $100. They connected to your Wi-Fi. You plug them in and you put them on the outside of your house. And if you're in like where I am, I could measure the PM10. And it's not perfect. The expensive one will be, put it on a scale of 1 is the best. Mm-hmm. This would be like a 0.6. But 0.6 is a whole lot better than 0.
0, right, exactly.
It's called Purple Air is the website you can look at it on. And I think it comes up on Weather Underground.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know all this stuff yet, but I come to the MAC meetings and they'll come talk to us.
Right. So I want to kind of weave in, you said you prepared this PowerPoint presentation and took it to Lucerne Valley. And I alluded earlier that one of the first times that I met you, we weren't actually in the same room. I had just moved here, and it was probably 3 or 4 weeks in, and there was a county meeting of the supervisors. And you were actually in San Bernardino presenting about Altamira, which was the 248 gated home community. And I was here locally with the crowd here at our local, where we can watch on the screen and stuff. And I was just so impressed with all the information you had. And then fast forward to today, when we just happened to show up at the same meeting for the Basin-wide Foundation luncheon, which was about grant writing. And she asked a question, who really loves to write grants? And you were one of 3 hands that went up in the room. So I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about these presentations that you put together and all the research that you do for these things that are so important to you in your community, whether it's the dust or housing development, which would create more dust because they have to go in and scrape, as you were saying.
And they do and they also have erosion, so they have floods full of mud.
Exactly. So what in you drives you to be so involved and out front and, I guess for lack of a better term, care so much?
I think you grow up the way I grew up, and it's just in you. That's what you love. But I love research, and I love science, and I'm not the only one out here.
No, that's not at all.
Little side note, when I was at this Energy Green meeting at Agua Caliente Casino this last week, there were 2 people at the South Coast Air Quality desk, and one of them, we were talking about various things, one of them being dust, and one guy, he started looking at me funny, and he said, I know you. I've seen you on TV. And I went, what? He's responsible for South Coast for San Bernardino, so he watches those supervisor meetings. And this is what he said, everybody out there. He said, the people who comment from the Morongo Basin are so impressive. They are so well prepared, so well spoken, that they make their point. I am so jealous that my people in the mountains don't do that.
Wow. So, that's great.
There you are, guys.
Well, I have to say, I have this whole story of when I came out here for the very first time, and it was just a body shift. It was a physical thing that happened to me. And 3 months later, I was living here. But during that 3 months, I probably made 3 or 4 trips out to make sure it wasn't some kind of romantic notion that I had. And I did a lot of research. And one of the things that kept coming up for me was how involved the community is.
Community is incredibly involved, and you can count on people showing up to make statements.
Right.
And they're professionals. Statements don't make a hill of beans difference if they're not grounded. They have to be, it's not, I just don't like this. That doesn't work out.
Right. You have to have some facts to back you up.
You gotta, why is this? You look at California Environmental Quality Act, and you look at the issues that have to be addressed. And nobody has to pay any attention to your comments, whether it's letter or spoken, if they aren't substantive. We're substantive.
Very, yes.
It's because we like this place that we then
fight for it.
Yeah. And we learn about the plants that are out here. We learn about the animals. We learn about the air quality. We learn about all these things and how they interact and what the consequences are going to be for people's action. Consequences are the biggest thing, and people don't pay attention.
No.
Except here in the Morongo Basin.
Exactly. So I feel really fortunate and lucky and proud to live in a place that operates that way.
I do too. I thought, how did I get so lucky to choose this?
Yeah.
There's people equally as intelligent in Borrego Springs, but the center of government is San Diego. That's what, okay, I'm not driving to San Diego.
Right.
It's a lovely drive, but come on. I'm sure I could have gotten a job there and, had a job here. So it was by happenstance. But I was extraordinarily clever to do this. I give myself a lot of credit.
If someone approached you and said, "So Pat, I'm thinking about moving out to the desert," what would be a couple of things that you would suggest to them or recommend to them or tell them to be aware of when they come?
I don't think I've thought about that, interestingly enough. Mostly because the people I know have come to the desert, or they're already desert lovers, because I also have a large acquaintance down in Borrego Springs. In San Diego, they love the desert there. So most people are aware of its extremes, whether it's hot, not as cold as it used to be, in the nighttime and in the winter, but it's warmer. It's definitely warmer, especially at night. So in reality, what did you give up?
Traffic.
Oh, gee. You love that?
No.
Okay.
Economic stress.
Yes, and you love economic stress?
I do not love economic stress.
Okay.
Quiet.
Oh, you gave up noise.
Yeah.
You gave up. So when you put that app on your phone and it measures the sound, it's going 25?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You didn't give up anything.
No, I didn't.
If you want to go to the opera, drive to the opera.
Right, exactly.
There's great museums, you just have to maybe drive a little farther, but for some people, that quiet is magic.
I agree.
I would go crazy to have to live in the noise of the city. And traffic, it used to be that I would drive to LA periodically. Now, the idea is like, I'm sure I'm busy.
Yeah, I don't drive anymore. I drive to Fontana because I can park there overnight for no charge, and then I take the Metro link into Union Station.
Right. Well,
and then I take the Metro, or most of my people are downtown anyway. Most of my friends.
So that works for you.
It works for me. Yeah.
So all around.
Yours are spread out.
So I don't do that so much anymore, and I think it's those things. Can you stand the quiet? Because some people can't.
Right. Yeah.
And you don't know that until you've experienced it. Some people are terrified by the quiet. You're a single woman living alone.
Right, which is another reason why I chose an environment like this, because I didn't know anybody moving out here, and I thought, well, my best option, I think, is an apartment complex that's a little small. I have a great view, and then I can go out and start to investigate areas, so when I am ready to, set my roots down, I'll know where I want to be and all that stuff.
I didn't know this place existed. That fits perfectly. I've been a single woman living alone in the desert for years. And if you ask me, was I ever afraid? Because people will ask me, aren't you terrified? Where's your dog? I have no dog. No, I'm not afraid. I've never had a problem. I'm not saying that I won't have a problem tomorrow. For the most part, doors are unlocked. If there's nobody staying over in my homestead house, I lock the doors. I don't like surprises.
Right.
But if there's two vehicles there, you're not going to be bothered. But I also note, in my neighborhood, which is pretty spread out, and this is in Desert Heights, at night, people have their lights on. They don't ever turn them off. Well, if I was somebody who wanted to vandalize or do whatever, you go where you can see. You cannot see my house.
That's awesome.
It is invisible. So not only would you not come out those 3 miles on a dirt road.
Right.
Why would you pick a place you can't even see?
Right, exactly.
It's kind of like,
I had an experience before I moved. I fell into a house sitting situation, which just was another one of those green lights about getting ready to make a move. So the guy he was renting out some of his rooms as Airbnb. He was going out of town. I had stayed in as an Airbnb, and then he said, oh, you were talking about house sitting. Do you want to stay here next week? I forgot to shut it off, and I've got 2 bookings. And I was like, oh, yeah. And then before he left, he hands me this BB rifle. And he goes, in case you need to look like you've got some power if somebody comes around. And I was like, what do you mean if somebody comes around? And then he handed me a BB pistol and said, just keep this by the bed. And then at night, because it was July, no AC, no swamp cooler, just fans. I didn't want to not miss any noise. I wouldn't even put the fan on. So it was still and quiet. And then all of a sudden you hear, and and then it just stopped. What are you doing? Get back on it and go. So that was unnerving. But I think if you're the kind of person who constantly worries about that sort of thing happening to you, it will eventually. You're attracting it to you. But nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
Nothing happened. Yeah, I was fine.
And there are stupid people out here doing stupid things.
Yes, there are. But they're everywhere.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
The end of the day.
And we're dealing with them. So maybe one of these days we'll be a little more aware about people carrying guns around and stuff like that.
Right.
But even guns, I'm not fond of them.
Yeah, no. I've shot one once in a range, and I said, I don't want to do it again. I've had the experience. I don't need to do that again. Yeah, it wasn't for me.
In Imperial Beach, where I lived, I had a garage, and the garage door was open for a while. And then as I was leaving, I looked, there was a box there. There wasn't my box.
Oh.
And so I opened it, and there was stuff in there, and included in the stuff was a pistol. This is the kind of pistol that you use when you start a race.
Oh, a starter pistol.
It's a starter pistol, but it looks like a
but
pistol.
But still, yeah.
It just gives me the willies, and I still have it.
Do you?
Yeah,
Just in case.
Well, what do you do with it? Maybe somebody who wants it at a school, give it to them, they can use it. I just remember how I recoiled just to even put it in my hand. And yet, I can remember target shooting with BB guns and things like that when I was little. And there were backdrops. Out here, frequently there's no backdrop.
No, and that's another issue, especially up in Wonder Valley, that they're experiencing with people just thinking that they can come out here. They don't know the quote-unquote unspoken rules. Or the real rules.
The real rules.
The real rules, which are you can't do that. But I think there's an impression that this is still just the wild, wild west, and let's go out to the desert and get crazy and do whatever we want. But there's people that live here. And
there is.
Yeah.
And more people every day.
Yeah.
And we actually, Supervisor Ramos is taking care of that.
Oh, that's good to know.
And the sheriff, yes.
That's great.
Yes, exactly.
Good.
So we've been working on it.
Well, and I think it's important, too, that if people want to know what's going on in their community, that they do come to a MAC meeting.
Bring your questions.
It's once a month. You can speak you fill out a card and you can speak and have your say, and you can hear what else is going on around you and what's happening.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe how many people were asking on one of the Facebook pages when they started building the mental health facility. What is that going up on the highway? Where did that come from? Did they ask anybody? Yeah.
They did. They really did.
And if you missed the meeting, it's on YouTube. You can be informed. Get the paper. There's so many ways to be informed.
Exactly. And we really need that facility.
Yes, we do.
It's very easy to get
I feel like we're very lucky to have it. There are so many places. It's needed everywhere in the U.S., and here we have it.
And have it.
So, and that was another surprise when people were saying those things. I thought, this is not the community I came to. The community I came to cares about people, and that is a facility that can take care of some people with some issues.
Right.
If not,
if
not here, where?
Well, then you have to somehow take care of your issues in San Bernardino. You have to drive down the hill. This is so needed here.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm
So
happy.
I'm
all for
meetings.
it. Yeah.
Ask questions. There was a big presentation. There was a number of architectural designs to choose from. So it was...
Yeah, it was there. And like I said, even if you miss it, watch it on YouTube and then, get a hold of whoever your MAC rep is and voice your concerns. Yeah, exactly. Or give your suggestions.
I think that the MAC serves a really valuable purpose. I'm very glad to be on it for a number of reasons. Because I can say I'm on it, sometimes I get information I might not get otherwise.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's important. I mean, I feel like when I'm in a community, I want to be aware of what's happening and what's going on and what's affecting it, what's coming, that sort of thing. And so I'm happy to go once a month and sit there for an hour and see what's going on.
Yeah. And if nothing much, well, nothing much. Next February, we're going to hear about broadband in the Basin.
Which will be exciting because so many, like you said, more people are moving here every day and wondering where those quote-unquote services are.
Actually, not so many people are moving. They come for Airbnb, but people who already live here have a problem. I know that the water district for Joshua Tree, I think it maybe signed up 5 or 6 people last year. That's not growth. But that's just what it can handle, actually. We haven't had good recharge of our aquifers since the end of the ice ages. So when you talk about drought, ho-hum, we've been in that for a long time, and we have to pay attention.
Well, we talked about a lot.
Yeah, we did.
But I'm grateful, and I'm so glad that you came.
Well, I'm delighted
And
to.
I will,
this was fun.
See you again at the next MAC meeting.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast with so many ways to spend your time. I really appreciate you spending it here with us. I hope you got some insight and inspiration, and if you did, I hope you'll share that with me and the other listeners on the Desert Lady Diaries Facebook page. If there was something you want to follow up, you'll probably find that in the show notes, or go to the blog page on the website and you'll see a list that says mentioned in this episode. You can find the links there. Next week, I'm talking to artist and educator Sant Khalsa, whose first trip through the desert was in the early 70s. Sant talked about the tiny house she and her husband David brought to the desert, her class in professional practices for the visual artist, and the importance of protecting these open spaces and ecosystems, and learning to give in to the desert atmosphere, not to stop, but just to slow down our ambition and be more present. We got a really nice comment on the podcast in customer reviews on iTunes from the Tattooed Lady, who says, even though I live in JT and know some of the women being interviewed, I've learned more about the ones I know and discovered some that I want to meet in person. Thank you so much for doing this project. I absolutely love it. Well, thank you so much, the Tattooed Lady. I'm so glad you're finding value in the podcast. And if you're finding value in this podcast, I hope you'll take the Tattooed Lady's lead and go out and leave a 5-star review or a comment on whatever platform you're downloading from or listening from. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening.